They said the Widow Queen's youngest son had bitten 11 grown men before his 6th birthday, and that he had never once bared his teeth at the woman with the ruined face who followed him through every dark hallway in Thornmere Keep. That woman was me. To understand how a scarred laundry girl came to be trusted with a feral prince, you have to go back to the morning I was scrubbing wax out of the East Corridor and Petra Lund knocked the bucket over on purpose. "Careful," she said, "not sorry at all. Wouldn't want you slipping and cracking that pretty face further." The other girls laughed the way they always did, quick and low, like it cost them nothing. I mopped the water before it could reach the runner rug, because a ruined face was still attached to hands that worked, and work was the only currency nobody could take from me twice. My left cheek and jaw had been rebuilt by a court physician 3 years ago after a fire, and rebuilt is a generous word for what a burn actually leaves behind. Puckered, shining in low light. A map of a night I did not choose to survive. I had run Hollow Creek Sanctuary once, a shelter for children too broken to be placed anywhere else. Omega orphans, mute ones, biters, screamers, the ones the good families didn't want. I had been good at it. Then a fire took the north wing while I was inside it, and I pulled out 9 children and could not reach the 10th. His name had been Tam. He was 4. I still had the tin box of chamomile flowers he'd pressed for me the week before, kept flat and dry between 2 panes of glass, and I carried it everywhere the way other women carried grief they could name out loud. After the fire, no one wanted a cursed woman running a nursery. The sanctuary closed. I came to Thornmere Keep because the wages were steady, and nobody here expected me to be anything but a pair of working hands. That morning, hands and bucket both, I heard the screaming 3 floors up. "That's the little prince again," Dot muttered beside me, not unkindly, just tired. Dot was the only one in the servants' hall who didn't flinch at my jaw, mostly because she was too busy complaining about her own blistered feet to notice anyone else's ruin. 4th nurse this month. Bit clean through old Renner's glove yesterday. Which one is it? Corvin, the quiet one who isn't quiet anymore. She lowered her voice further, the way everyone did when they spoke of the Widow Queen's children. Ever since the consort died, that boy hasn't said a word, just bites. I knew the story the way the whole kingdom knew it. Queen Cassia Thorne, the Widow Queen of Thornmere, feared from the eastern mountains to the Salt Coast, had lost her bonded mate 2 years past. Marin Vane had died of a fever that came on fast and cruel, and the queen had gone from formidable to untouchable overnight. A woman built entirely of iron and winter pine who did not smile at council and did not forgive at court. She had 3 children by that bond, triplets, 6 years old, the whole kingdom's hope for succession. 2 of them were, by all report, ordinary and golden. The 3rd had stopped speaking the week his mother died and started biting the week after. I thought nothing further of it. I had learned not to want anything that wasn't already mine, and a feral prince 3 floors above me was about as far from mine as the moon. Then Mistress Yarrow found me at noon, wringing her hands. "The queen wants every able body who's ever managed a difficult child," she said. "That sanctuary burned down, Mistress Yarrow. She doesn't care how it ended. She cares that no one else has lasted more than 3 days." Yarrow's eyes flicked, just once, to my scar, and then away, ashamed of the flick. "They're saying she'll send the boy to Briar Hall if nothing changes by the new moon." Briar Hall was a sanitarium. It was where the Crown sent embarrassments. I had heard enough about the Crown's mercy to know a boy sent there at 6 would not come out whole, if he came out at all. I did not decide to go, because I believed I would succeed. I decided to go because nobody else was going, and I remembered exactly what it felt like to be the child nobody else would walk toward. I climbed the stairs to the nursery wing with my bucket still in hand, because I had forgotten I was holding it, and that is how I arrived at the worst room in the castle, mop water dripping down my wrist, tin box of pressed flowers in my apron pocket, about to meet the two women who would undo my entire careful, invisible life. The nursery door was open, and the room inside it was a wreck. A guard knelt by the wall clutching a bleeding hand, teeth marks clean through his glove exactly as Dot had promised. A nurse sobbed near the hearth, and in the far corner, wedged between a toy chest and the window seat, was a small boy with his mother's dark hair and his mother's ferocity, and none of anyone's calm, snarling low in his throat like something that had forgotten it used to be a child. Standing over him, one hand extended, voice pitched low and commanding, was the Widow Queen herself. "Corvin, stand down." It was an alpha's command, full-throated, meant to be obeyed by instinct alone. The boy did not obey. He pressed harder into the corner, and a new sound came out of him, high and wrong, and the queen's jaw tightened like she'd been struck. Nobody noticed me in the doorway. I set the bucket down without a sound and walked toward the corner the way I used to walk toward children who had learned that grown hands meant pain. Slow, low, no reaching. I did not look at his eyes. Eye contact reads as a threat to a cornered thing, human or otherwise, and I did not speak, because voices had failed in that room all morning, and one more voice was not going to fix it. I sat on the floor 3 feet away and matched my breathing to what his should have been, slow and deep, and I waited. The queen's voice cut across the room, sharp with warning. "He'll take your hand off." I didn't answer her either. Answering would have meant looking up, and looking up would have meant becoming a threat again. I reached into my apron instead, slow enough for a wary animal to track, and drew out the tin box. I opened it without lifting my eyes to his face and set one pressed chamomile flower on the floor between us, close enough to smell, far enough that he'd have to choose to close the distance himself. The room went silent in the particular way a room goes silent when everyone in it is holding their breath at once. Corvin's snarling dropped to a thin, uncertain whine. His eyes, his mother's eyes, I would learn later, the exact same storm gray fixed on the flower. Then, impossibly, on me. Not my scar, not the ruined half of my face that every adult in this castle flinched from. Just me, waiting, the way I had waited for 9 children before him, and would have waited forever for a 10th if the fire had given me the chance. He crossed the distance on his hands and knees and put his forehead against my shoulder, and he did not bite me. I looked up then, because it seemed safe to, and found the Widow Queen of Thornmere staring at me like I had performed a resurrection in her nursery. Up close her scent hit me first, iron and winter pine, cold and clean and edged like a blade left out overnight, and something in my chest went tight and stupid and unbidden. I would spend the following weeks pretending I hadn't noticed. I would fail completely. "He hasn't let anyone touch him since the funeral," she said, and her voice had lost its command entirely. It was just a woman's voice now, rough with something she was working very hard not to name. 2 years. Not me. Not his siblings. No one. "He's not feral," I said, before I could stop myself, because I had spent my whole ruined career arguing that exact point to people who didn't want to hear it. "He's terrified, and everyone keeps trying to command the terror out of him instead of letting it run its course." The queen studied me for a long moment, my apron, my scar, the flower tin still open in my lap, the boy asleep against my shoulder as though he'd been waiting 6 years for permission to stop fighting. "What's your name?" "Wren Calder, Your Grace." "You ran a shelter." "I did. It burned down." It did. I did not explain further. I had learned that grief handed over too easily gets picked apart by strangers, and I did not yet know if this stranger, iron and winter pine and terrifying reputation, was safe to hand anything to. "Then you'll stay," Cassia Thorne said, and it was not a question, and it was not quite a command either. It was something rawer, closer to a plea dressed in a queen's clothing. "You'll have rooms in the family wing. Whatever wage you ask, whatever you need." Her eyes went to the sleeping boy, then back to me, and something in them cracked open just slightly, like a door someone had forgotten was locked. "Just don't let him go back to that corner." I looked down at Corvin, breathing slow against my shoulder for what his nurses swore was the first time in 2 years, and I felt the old shelter instinct rise up in me like a tide I'd thought had gone out for good. "You don't run from a scared thing," I reminded myself, the way I had reminded myself every single night at Hollow Creek. "You wait for it to come to you." "I'll stay," I said, and did not yet understand that I had just walked through the only door in my life that would never let me leave the same woman who'd knocked on it. They gave me rooms with a real bed and a window that looked over the kitchen gardens, and it took less than a day for the difference between my old life and this new one to announce itself in every direction. The corridor rugs alone were worth more than a year of my sanctuary wages. Petra Lund, reassigned to polish silver 2 floors down from where I now slept, found ways to appear in doorways just to look at me like I'd stolen something. "Warming her bed already? Are you?" she said on the second morning, close enough that only I could hear it, ruined face and all. Must be a first for her. I didn't answer. I had learned that Petra's kind of cruelty needed a reaction to survive, and I intended to starve it. Corvin, for his part, had decided I was furniture that occasionally fed him, which was the closest thing to trust he had left to give anyone. He followed me from the nursery to the kitchens to the small garden courtyard where his siblings played, always 3 steps behind, always silent, and he let no one else near him without a fight. Aster, his sister, older by 4 minutes and imperious about it, informed me on my 3rd day that Corvin used to talk more than all 3 of them combined. He used to tell the best stories, she said, swinging her legs from a stone bench, while Birch, the middle triplet, quietly stole biscuits from a passing tray. Before, he hasn't told one since Mama. "Since your mother died?" Aster's small face did the complicated thing children's faces do when they're repeating a truth too big for them. "He was in the room," she said. "We weren't. He was." I filed that away like a splinter I couldn't yet reach to pull, and I kept following the boy who followed me, and I told myself the ache building in my chest whenever the queen entered a room was simple gratitude, and nothing more dangerous than that. The queen came to the nursery most evenings, always after her council sessions, always still carrying that iron and winter pine like a coat she hadn't taken off. She rarely spoke to me beyond logistics, Corvin's meals, his sleep, whether the biting had lessened, but she watched me work with an intensity that made my skin feel too small. "He let you braid his hair today," she said one night, low, almost accusing. "He's never let a soul near his hair. He likes the humming, not the braiding." I kept my eyes on the boy asleep between us, because looking at her directly still felt like standing too close to a fire that hadn't decided whether to warm me or take my other cheek. "Everyone's been trying to fix the outside of him. I'm just trying to reach the inside." Cassia was quiet a long moment. Then, so low I almost missed it, my mother used to say control was the only thing keeping this house from falling apart, that love makes rulers soft, and soft rulers get their thrones taken. Her jaw worked. "I have been very controlled since Marin died." "How's that working?" I asked, before I could stop myself, and something that might have been the start of a laugh moved through her, quick and startled, gone before it fully arrived. Badly, she admitted, and it was the truest thing I'd heard her say. It was 3 nights later that her hand brushed mine, passing Corvin between us at bedtime. And the whole of my arm went warm where iron and winter pine had touched chamomile and warm beeswax, and neither of us pulled away as fast as we should have. She looked at me like she'd been burned herself, and I understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who had spent 2 years pretending she wanted nothing, that I was in very serious trouble. I was still deciding what to do with that trouble when Mistress Yarrow came to find me, wringing her hands the way she had the very first day. "The regents asked for you," she said. "Lord Dashiell. Tonight, in the East receiving room." He said it wasn't a request. I had met Regent Dashiell Vane exactly twice, once in passing, once at a council dinner where he'd looked at my scar the way a man looks at a stain he intends to have removed. He was Marin Vane's brother, the Queen's dead mate's blood, and he sat on the Regency Council with the kind of patience that made my skin crawl in ways Corvin's bites never had. He smiled with his mouth, and never with anything else. I went, because refusing a summons from the second most powerful person in Thornmere was not a luxury a laundry girl turned nursemaid could afford, and because some old, sharp instinct from the fire had already started telling me that this man was not asking about the weather. The East receiving room was too warm and too still, and Dashiell Vane stood at the window with his hands folded like a man rehearsing patience he did not feel. "Miss Calder," he said, without turning, "you've made quite an impression on my nephew. He's a sweet boy under the fear, my lord. He's a liability under the fear." Now he turned, and his smile arrived exactly on schedule, mouth only. A feral air is a weakness the crown cannot carry indefinitely. "I understand you ran a sanctuary that burned to the ground with children inside it." The room tilted very slightly. "1 child died." I pulled 9 out. How reassuring for the 8 who survived. He let that sit, let it do its damage, and I understood then that he had not summoned me to discuss Corvin at all. He had summoned me to be measured for a coffin of accusation, fitted while I stood there smiling politely at my own murder. The council meets in a fortnight to discuss Prince Corvin's fitness for succession. I intend to raise the question of what sort of woman the Queen has installed in her nursery. A cursed woman, some might say. Bad luck follows you, Miss Calder, doesn't it? Ask the 10th child. I did not run from him, though everything in me wanted to. You wait for it to come to you, I told myself, and it was the hardest I had ever had to hold that creed against my own chest. Is there something you want from me, my lord, or did you only want to watch me flinch? Something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that the ruined thing had teeth. I want the boy declared unfit before the new moon, and quietly, without a queen's grief clouding the council's judgment. You could make that happen. Recommend Briar Hall yourself. Save everyone a great deal of unpleasantness. His voice dropped, silk over stone. Or you could discover exactly how unpleasant can be. I left the East receiving room with my hands shaking, and did not tell the Queen what he'd said, not yet, because some cowardly, self-protective part of me still believed I could outwork a threat the way I'd outworked every other cruelty in my life. I was wrong, and I would learn exactly how wrong 4 days later, in front of the entire winter court. The council chamber was full for the Frost Night banquet, nobles and regents and every sneering face Thornmere had to offer, and I was there only because Corvin would not stay anywhere I wasn't. He sat rigid at my side through the first course, and I saw the exact moment Dashiell Vane crossed the room toward our end of the table, smiling his mouth, only smile, and reached out to pat the boy's head the way an uncle might. Corvin came off the bench like something unhinged and sank his teeth into the regent's wrist hard enough to draw a shout that silenced the entire hall. It was not like the guard's bite or the nurse's or any of the 11 bites that had come before. Those had been panic, quick and glancing, a cornered thing lashing at whatever was nearest. This was different, sustained, furious, aimed, the boy's whole small body shaking with a rage that had a name he couldn't yet say. I had spent 6 weeks learning the difference between Corvin's fears and Corvin's fury, and this was fury, pure and specific, and it took both my arms and half my strength to peel him off before real damage was done. The hall erupted. Dashiell cradled his wrist and looked at Corvin with something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, something closer to recognition, quickly hidden, and then looked at me. "You see," he said, loud enough for the whole chamber, blood beating at his cuff. Uncontrollable, dangerous, I ask the council to consider, this very night, whether Briar Hall isn't the safer mercy for us all, and whether the woman entrusted with him isn't part of the sickness rather than the cure. I felt every eye in the hall land on my scar at once, the old public shame rising up my throat like smoke, and I braced for the queen to do what queens do when convenient, distance herself from an embarrassment. Cassia Thorne rose instead, iron and winter pine flooding the hall so hard half the courtiers flinched, and her voice, when it came, did not shake at all. "My son bit the one man in this castle he has never once bitten by accident," she said, and the room went utterly still. "In 2 years he has drawn blood from 11 people who loved him and meant him no harm. He has never once, not one single time, drawn blood from Wren Calder, who came to this family with nothing but a burned sanctuary and a tin of pressed flowers and gave my silent son back his voice's beginnings. You will forgive me, Lord Regent, if I find that math considerably more instructive than your wrist." She turned, and her eyes found mine across the hall, and something in them was fierce and unguarded and entirely too visible for a woman who had built 2 years of iron around herself. "She stays. He stays. This council is adjourned." She swept out with Corvin gathered against her hip and me trailing in her wake like a woman who'd just watched her whole careful invisibility burn down a second time, differently this time, into something that might, terrifyingly, be worth more than the ashes. Dashiell Vane watched us go with his wrist wrapped and his mouth only smile finally gone. And in its place was something colder and far more patient, and I understood, walking out of that hall, that I had just made an enemy who did not lose gracefully. The lockdown came 8 days later, in the dead hours before dawn, when the watch captain's horn sounded through Thornmere Keep like the sky itself had cracked. "Raiders at the north wall," someone said. "Assassins in the kitchens," said someone else. By the time Captain Ilsa reached the family wing, hauling us all toward the fortified cellar with the particular efficiency of a woman who drilled this exact scenario 40 times, nobody could say for certain what was true, except that it was real. And it was close, and Corvin would not stop screaming. Not fear screaming, memory screaming. I understood the difference the moment I heard it, because I had heard it before from other children who'd once watched something they couldn't undo. He was 6 years old and reliving the last night he'd seen his mother alive, and no amount of stillness or chamomile was reaching him this time. "He's not here," I said uselessly, holding him while he thrashed. "Cor, you're here. You're safe. I've got you." And none of it landed, because grief that old doesn't listen to the present tense. Cassia dropped to her knees on the cellar floor in front of us, ignoring Captain Rook's protests about defensible positions, and put both hands on either side of her son's face. "Corvin, look at me. It's Mama." Her voice cracked on the word, first time I'd ever heard it crack. "I'm here. I didn't leave. I'm here." The screaming didn't stop, not at first, but it changed key, and between the two of us, her voice and my hands, her scent and my stillness, he wound down slowly into hiccuping sobs and finally into sleep, curled between his mother and the woman who'd followed his fear all the way down into whatever room he kept it in. Aster and Birch huddled against Kasaya's other side, and above us the sounds of the raid faded into shouting, and then into nothing, a false alarm or a routed threat. We wouldn't know until morning. But in the low lamplight of that cellar, with 3 children finally asleep, Cassia looked at me over their heads with an exhaustion so complete it had stripped every wall off her face. "I keep waiting to stop being afraid," she said quietly. "Every night. I keep waiting. I know. Do you?" It wasn't quite a challenge. "You always look so certain, Ren, like nothing could touch you." "I'm not certain of anything," I admitted, my voice barely above the children's breathing. "I'm terrified most days. I just learned a long time ago that running doesn't make the scared things smaller. It just means you're tired and scared, instead of only scared." Her hand found mine over Corvin's sleeping shoulder, and this time neither of us pretended it was an accident. "Tell me to stop," she said, low, "and I will." I did not tell her to stop. Her mouth found mine in the lamplight, careful, questioning, iron and winter pine wrapping around chamomile and warm beeswax, until I couldn't tell where her breath ended and mine began. And when we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, the way her son rested his against my shoulder, like some hunger in this family only had one shape it knew how to take. "I have wanted to do that since you sat on my nursery floor with a flower," she whispered. Above us, footsteps thundered on the cellar stairs, and Captain Rook's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Your Grace, you need to see this." The warmth didn't have time to cool before dread came to replace it. What Rook led us to, in a servant's corridor near the kitchens, was a locked storeroom that shouldn't have been locked, and inside it, packed and half-hidden, were forged travel papers bearing my name and a description of me that made me sound like exactly the kind of woman a nervous council would believe capable of arson twice in one lifetime. "Someone's building a case against you," Rook said grimly. "And it isn't subtle." I thought of Dashiell's mouth only smile and the wrist Corvin had bitten, and understood that the quiet war I'd been trying to survive by staying still had just declared its next move, and it was aimed directly at the space between me and everything I had just, finally, let myself want. That night, once the children were settled and the keep had gone back to its uneasy quiet, Cassia found me in the small sitting room off the nursery, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman finally setting down a weight she'd carried alone too long. "Tell me about the fire," she said. Not a command, a request, gently made, and I understood it for the gift it was. So I told her about Hollow Creek and the 9 children I'd carried out one by one down a smoke-blind staircase, and the 10th, Tam, who had gone back for the flower tin he'd made me because he was 4 and didn't understand that a gift wasn't worth a life, and how by the time I'd found him the ceiling had already come down between us, and how the fire had taken half my face and all of my belief that I deserved to run anything ever again. "I didn't rebuild the sanctuary," I said, staring at the tin box in my lap, "because I couldn't trust myself with another child's life. And then your son wouldn't stop following me, and I kept waiting to fail him the way I failed Tam, and he just kept staying, like he already knew I wasn't going to leave." Cassia was quiet a long moment, her hand finding mine again, steadier this time, less like an accident and more like a choice. Marin used to say I ran this kingdom like I was daring it to prove her wrong about needing anyone, she said. My mother taught me that control was strength and love was the crack in the wall. When Marin died, I thought the crack had killed her, that if I hadn't loved so completely, so visibly, whatever wanted her gone would never have found a reason to take her. Her voice thinned. I have spent 2 years being unbreakable, so nothing could ever use my love as a door again. And then you sat on my floor with a burned face and a flower, and I understood I'd had it backward the whole time. It was never the love that broke us. It was the silence after. What if it happens again? I whispered, because some fears don't go quiet just because you've named them. Then it happens again, and we survive it together instead of apart, she said, because I would rather love you and grieve you than never have loved you at all, and called that safety. She kissed my scarred cheek, deliberate, unhurried, like she was rewriting what that map of skin was allowed to mean. Marry me, Ren called her. Not tonight, not even soon. But someday, when Dashiell Vane is nothing more than a bad memory in this house, I want you to be mine in every way this kingdom has a word for. I didn't have an answer ready that felt big enough for what she just handed me, so I kissed her again instead, and let that be the answer until words could catch up. We should have known better than to let ourselves be happy out loud in a house with Dashiell Vane still walking its halls. The blow came 4 days later, while Cassia was 3 hours' ride away settling a border dispute, and I was walking the children back from the garden courtyard. Captain Rook's own guards, Rook's, not the regent's, which was the detail that told me later how deep the forgery ran, met us at the nursery door with a writ bearing the crown seal, citing danger to the heir, and naming Ren Calder, former proprietor of a sanctuary destroyed by fire under her supervision, as unfit to hold custody of Prince Corvin pending council review. He's coming with us, the lead guard said, not unkindly, clearly following orders he didn't love. Regent's orders, writs in order. You're to be held for questioning. Corvin understood before I did what was happening. He went rigid against my hip, then feral in the old way, the cornered way, biting and thrashing as 2 guards pried him loose from me, and I screamed his name until my throat tore, and it changed nothing at all. I watched them carry him down the corridor toward a coach with Briar Hall's black seal on its door, screaming in a way I had heard exactly once before, in a cellar, reliving the worst night of his life. Except this time, the worst night of his life was happening again in real time, and I could not reach him. They took me to a locked chamber in the East Wing instead of a cell, which I understood later was Dashiell's mercy, the kind that lets you watch everything through a window and still calls itself kindness. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and my hands over my ears, and for the first time since the fire, I let myself scream too, because there are some griefs too large to carry quietly, and the sound of that boy being taken from me was one of them. I do not know how long I sat there before I noticed the tin box had fallen from my apron in the struggle, and 1 pressed chamomile flower had been left behind on the corridor floor. And something about that small crushed thing, so far from where it belonged, told me exactly what I needed to do instead of grieve. Cassia arrived back at Thornmere Keep before dawn, having ridden 3 hours in the dark on nothing but a single garbled message from Mistress Yarrow, and found her son gone and her Omega locked in a room and her regent nowhere to be found. I heard her voice through the door before I saw her, iron and winter pine flooding the whole East Wing, guards scattering before her like leaves, and when she broke the lock herself with her bare hands, I had never in my life been so glad to see anyone's face. "Where is he?" she said, and it wasn't a question so much as a demand the universe itself had better answer. "Briar Hall," Dashiell's writ. My voice came out wrecked. Cassia, it's forged. The papers about me, the fire. I know what you are, she said, gripping my face in both hands, forehead against mine exactly as she had in the cellar. I have known what you are since you sat on a nursery floor and gave my son back his breath. We're going to go get him. Both of us. We rode through the night with Captain Rook and a dozen of her most trusted, and I spent every mile of it thinking of the last time I had run toward a burning building too late, and telling myself this time would be different. This time I would reach him. Because I had already failed one child to the flames, and I would not fail a second to a locked room built by a man's ambition. Briar Hall rose out of the dark like something that had given up, pretending to be a place of mercy, bars on the windows, a smell of lie and old fear, and at its center, in a padded cell meant for grown men who'd lost their minds, a 6-year-old boy chained by wrist restraints to keep him from biting the orderlies who'd dragged him there. Dashiell Vane stood outside the cell with his arms folded, and for one terrible second he looked almost sorry, before the mouth-only smile slid back into place. Cassia, I did warn you the boy was a liability. Better he's contained here than embarrassing the crown further. Let him go, Cassia said, and her voice had gone past fury into something colder and far more dangerous. The council writ is in order. You know the law as well as I do. His eyes flicked to me. Your Omega's forged travel papers are the least of what I've prepared, sister's widow. I have testimony. I have physicians. I have 2 years of a queen too grief-blind to see her own son needs containing, not coddling. I stopped listening to the argument of law and looked instead at Corvin, chained and shaking in the corner of that cell, and something in me went very still and very clear the way it always did in the moment before I stopped being afraid and started being useful. Cor, I said, kneeling at the bars, ignoring everyone else in the corridor. It's Ren. I need you to do something very brave for me. I need you to show me what happened. The night your mama got sick, can you show me with your hands the way we practiced? We had spent 6 weeks building a language out of nothing. Gestures for hungry, for tired, for afraid, for stay. Because a boy who'd stopped speaking still needed a way to be heard. He looked at me through the bars with his mother's storm-gray eyes, and slowly, shaking, he lifted his small chained hands and made the shape we'd built together for a person. And then a second shape, a circle turned twice at the wrist. A gesture he'd made a dozen times in his sleep that I had never once understood until this exact moment. A ring. Turned twice, the way a man turns a signet ring when he's nervous. That's Dashiell's ring, Captain Rook said quietly, staring at the gesture. He does that. Everyone at court's seen it. Corvin made the shape again, more insistent now, and then mimed something small and slow, a hand tipping an invisible cup toward another hand, and looked at his mother with an expression that had waited 2 years to be understood. Cassia's face went the color of old ash. He watched someone put something in Marin's cup. Dashiell's composure cracked for exactly 1 instant, and in that instant I saw the truth of him plainly, the way you see a fire's true size only once the smoke clears. Children's games prove nothing, he said, too fast, too loud for a man who had nothing to fear. Search his rooms, Cassia said to Rook, without ever taking her eyes off her brother-in-law. Search his ledgers, every apothecary he's paid in the last 3 years, and get my son out of these restraints before I forget every law that says I can't kill you where you stand. I stopped her with a hand on her arm, because I could feel the violence rising in her like weather, and I remembered exactly what kind of woman I'd fallen for, and exactly what kind of woman I needed her to still be when this was over. Not like that, I said quietly. Not with his blood on your hands in front of your children. Let the ledgers do it. Let the whole kingdom watch him drown in his own proof." She looked at me for a long moment, iron and winter pine and grief and fury all warring behind her eyes. And then, slowly, she nodded and told the orderlies to unchain her son, and did not touch Dashiell Vane, though it plainly cost her everything not to. The council chamber was fuller than it had been at Frost Night. Every noble and regent in Thornmere crowded in for what Mistress Yarrow called, grimly, the reckoning. Captain Rook's search had turned up exactly what Corvin's small chained hands had promised, an apothecary's ledger paid in 3 installments the week before Merrin Vane's death, a vial matching the fever's unnatural onset, and letters, careless and arrogant, discussing a regency council that would fall to Dashiell the moment any heir was declared unfit. They played the physician's testimony first, then the apothecary's confession, extracted under the crown's own binding oath magic that made lying in that chamber physically impossible. Then, Cassia stood, with Corvin's small hand in hers and mine on his other side, and had him repeat, in the gesture language we had built together, exactly what he'd seen the night his mother died. A ring turned twice, a cup tipped, a shadow at the door that every soul in that chamber now recognized. Dashiell Vane's composure finally, fully broke. She was going to name her own council seat over mine, he spat, done pretending, done smiling with only his mouth. 2 years I have run the treasury while she grieved in her rooms and let this castle rot into sentiment. I did what needed doing. I would do it again. This kingdom does not need a queen who kneels on nursery floors. It needs one who rules. This kingdom, Cassia said, and her voice carried to every corner of that chamber without rising once, needed a mother who could hold her son while he learned to speak again. You will never understand the difference between weakness and mercy, and that is precisely why you will never rule anything again. She turned to the assembled council. I ask for his arrest, his stripping of title, and his trial under full crown law. And I ask that this council remember, when it next questions the fitness of anyone in my household, her eyes found mine, and held that the woman it once called cursed found the proof that 100 physicians and half this chamber's guards could not. The guards took Dashiell Vane out in chains, still arguing his own necessity to a room that had stopped listening, and Petra Lund, watching from the servants' gallery with her hand over her mouth, would not meet my eyes again for the rest of that winter. When the chamber had cleared, Cassia knelt in front of the entire remaining court, nobles, servants, her own children, and took both my scarred hands in hers. I have ruled this kingdom by being unbreakable, she said, loud enough for every witness in that hall, and it took a scarred omega with a tin of pressed flowers to teach me that unbreakable and untouched were never the same thing. Wren Calder, you gave my silent son back his voice, and you gave my frozen heart back its reason for beating. I am asking you, in front of everyone who ever called you cursed, to be my bonded mate. Say the word, and I will bare my throat to you before this entire court. Tell me to stop, she added, softer, just for me, echo of a cellar and a lamplit sitting room, both, and I will. Don't stop, I said, and my voice broke on the words in the good way. The way that meant something in me had finally healed instead of scarred, and the whole chamber erupted into sound as Cassia Thorne, widow queen of Thornmere, bared her throat to a laundry girl in front of the same nobles who'd once laughed at her ruined face. The bite, when it came that night in private, was gentle and certain, and asked permission twice before it was given, and the bond that snapped into place between us felt like every locked door in my life finally opening onto the same warm room. The wedding took place at the first thaw. in the garden courtyard where the triplets had once stolen biscuits and told me their brother used to tell the best stories. Corvin stood beside his mother in a small formal coat, and when Captain Rook asked, in front of the assembled court, whether anyone present had ever seen the boy wait for someone the way he waited for me, she said, flat and gruff and entirely sincere, "In 15 years of service, I have never once seen that child hold still for anyone. He held still for her the first day she walked into that nursery, and he's held still for her every day since. That's not fear anymore. That's love, and I never thought I'd see the difference so plainly in a boy who couldn't say the word." Corvin, 3 months into relearning speech with a patience only a child who has waited that long for it can carry, tugged my sleeve during the vows and whispered, rough and small and entirely his own voice, "Stay." It was the first word he had spoken aloud since his mother's death. "Always," I told him, and meant it with everything the fire had left me. A year on, Dashiell Vane sat stripped of title and land in the Crown's northern hold, his ledgers and his ambition both reduced to a cautionary tale told at council to remind future regents what patience curdled into becomes. Petralund had been quietly reassigned to a distant kitchen, chastened, and Dot had been promoted to head of the servants' hall, where she complained about her feet with considerably more authority. Aster had declared herself, at 7, the future strategist of Thornmere, and Birch had declared himself in charge of biscuits. Corvin spoke in full sentences now, mostly to tell stories, the way he used to, and had started teaching his mother the gesture language we'd built, insisting she learn it properly in case anyone else in the family ever needed a voice that didn't use words. Cassia had softened in ways the old court still marveled at, though her enemies had learned, expensively, that soft did not mean weak. She still ruled with iron. She simply no longer mistook the iron for the whole of her. On the morning I am thinking of now, early spring light coming gold through the nursery window, the tin box that had once held one dead boy's dried flowers sat refilled on the sill with fresh chamomile from the Queen's own garden, pressed flat between new glass, and beside it lay 3 children's drawings and a small carved wooden crown Corvin had made for me, without being asked. Cassia stood behind me at the window, her arms around my waist, iron and winter pine wrapped around chamomile and warm beeswax the way it had been the very first night, and Corvin's voice carried up from the courtyard below, telling his siblings some enormous, joyful lie about a dragon. I had spent so many years believing that being seen was a danger, that a ruined face and a burned sanctuary meant I had forfeited any right to be chosen by anyone, let alone loved out loud in front of a whole watching kingdom. I understand now that the scar was never the story. The story was always what a person does with the scared, cornered thing in front of them, whether they flinch or whether they stay. You do not run from a scared thing. You wait for it to come to you, and if you wait long enough, with patience enough, it will not only come, it will finally let itself be seen. The end.